Everyone. Thank you guys for sitting in your living rooms or bedrooms or wherever you are, maybe somewhere nice, and listening to this. So we're both going to keep looking at the comments box. I'll kind of glance over there to try to catch your questions. So if you do have a question during the presentation, please throw a comment out there and I will try to answer it as quickly as I can. Yeah, if folks are having any technical difficulties, please let us know. I'm also going to turn my video off while I'm giving the presentation, just so that my face and if I'm sitting there doing this, because I tend to talk a lot with my hands, it's not too distracting where you're trying to watch the PowerPoint, but you see me in the little box, up there, just doing this, and you're like, what the heck is she doing? So I will go ahead right now and start sharing my screen. I also have a dog, so if you hear barking, I apologize. So let me go ahead and share my PowerPoint. And let me quickly, there I go. Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Okay, let me pull up the comments also. I'm wondering if there's a way to pull up the comments. Shoot. Okay. I can't pull it to that screen. Okay, for some reason, I can't see the comments.
I can keep an eye on them for any questions. I was just able to hit the chat button again at the bottom of the screen and it popped up. But I'm sure everybody's is different.
Okay. So here we go, and I'm gonna kind of put you guys over here on the side. Okay, so this presentation, typically it takes the entire time that we're there. So usually from 1 to 4:30. But usually during Zooms, it goes by a little bit faster. Just most people don't ask a lot of questions via Zoom. Again, my email and stuff is right here, so please feel free to, ask any questions. If there's something that you didn't understand on the presentation and you didn't have a chance to ask, go ahead and email me. If you'd like a copy of the presentation, I can go ahead and send one to Alexa. That way she can get it out to all of you guys. Okay, so the last time I was with you guys, we were learning about the basics of entomology and how to identify pests. So another part of being a master gardener is you guys have to try to diagnose plant problems. And unfortunately, people are going to bring you in material that may not have any arthropods on it. I mean, if there's arthropods that they bring in, that's great. Other times they're going to bring you, old leaves that are chewed or, weird, funky, curly looking leaves. So you guys basically have to act like detectives, where the diagnosis generally depends upon the signs of arthropod activity. So learning the presence of arthropod or arthropod-related products can help you diagnose a lot of the problems out there. You have things like sooty mold out there. So if you see something like sooty mold, typically you're going to be looking at an arthropod that secretes something like honeydew. Sometimes you'll see webbing like you see on this rose. So you know that it's going to be something like spider mites. Sometimes you'll see some of this frass. Can you guys see my cursor? Alexa, do you see my cursor if I'm moving it in the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Oh, here it is. Yes, okay. Oh, here's the chat. Okay, this is how I can get the chat. Okay, so you'll see some of the frass, you see some of the bite marks, and here you're lucky if someone will actually bring you in that critter. You can also look at things like chewed or tattered plant parts. So sometimes people will bring you in a sample that looks like this, or some of the petals of their flowers that are missing notches, or some of your vegetables that look like this, where it looks like there's some fungus diseases that developed there, but obviously something else was munching on it. You can also see stippling, which is what you see here, or some of the coarse stippling, which sometimes looks like some sort of nutrient that's missing in the plant, but it can also be caused by an arthropod, or some of the bronzed foliage that you see right here due to those individual cells dying from arthropod feeding, or specific plant parts that are actually dying off, like the edges of this leaf or even all the leaves on this tree here. You've got distortion of plants, like you see here on this citrus branch, or the crinkled and curled leaves on this plant right here, or even entire fruits that are completely distorted. So typically people are going to bring these pieces to you and they're going to say, so what's killing my plant? Or they may give you pictures. So something to keep in mind is that arthropods aren't always the culprits. There's a lot of other things like plant diseases that can be hitting the trees or your plants, or improper cultural practices or conditions. You know, something like overwatering, underwatering, too much of a specific fertilizer, not enough of it. But typically when a plant is not doing well, people tend to think it's either water or some sort of pest. And another thing to keep in mind is that a single pest can also cause more than one symptom. Sometimes when they open the fruit and start munching on it, again, you'll get some of the pathogens hitting that fruit, or it can vector other diseases like the Asian citrus psyllid. And there's also several factors that can combine and cause poor plant performance. So some tips for diagnosing your arthropod problems: make sure to ask them what the host plant was or where they were found. With the UCIPM site, having the host plant will help you significantly. If they have no idea, if they just bring you in a bug and they just say, hey, ID this, it can be a little tough at times. If they found it, say, on their carpet and it's a tiny little beetle, you can narrow it down to something like a carpet beetle. Remember that most damage is seen as old damage. Typically, that's when people will start noticing their plants aren't doing well, is when they start dying, or they'll bring you in the old leaves. And so the odds of actually finding some sort of arthropod on there are pretty slim. But, you know, again, knowing specific symptoms, you can start narrowing it down as to what it could possibly be. Because a lot of the evidence of arthropods still remain on the plant even after they're gone. So you'll see some of the casings of old arthropods. You may see a few eggs there. You may see webbing or frass, or, you know, the damage. The presence of arthropods in a sample doesn't mean that they're the ones causing the problems. So keep that in mind. Also, a lot of the times arthropods rarely kill their host. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind. And they also tend to go after stressed plants or weaker plants. So asking them about what their cultural practices are would be good if they're like overwatering, underwatering, not fertilizing enough. And people will also exaggerate the size of insects. So ask them if they can bring in a sample. I mean, you'd be amazed at how a garden spider the size of a quarter can suddenly become like a giant tarantula. And people will swear on the size of it, or they will swear on the infestation. So I've had calls in the past where people will use that word, like, I've got an infestation of silverfish, and it's that they've seen 5. And it's more likely they've seen the same one twice. So make sure to ask them that, because sometimes some of those things are normal. It's okay to have a few silverfish in your house. Having several hundred or 1,000, that's a different story. And don't be afraid to ask if you don't know the answer. So if there's something you guys can't get, you know, instead of just trying to guess on something, ask one of the advisors. They are more than likely to help. And the helpline also has my personal email. Alexa has my personal email, and folks still email me, or, you know, if they have my cell phone number, they actually call me, or they'll send me pictures if they need help in identification or trying to figure out, you know, what a specific critter is or what could have been on their plant. So please don't be afraid to reach out. And keep in mind that not all pest calls are appropriate for master gardeners. I don't know how it's been this year, but when I was at the extension, it seemed that every year we were getting more and more folks with what we call delusory parasitosis. And what that is, it's when individuals think that they have basically bugs crawling on them, even though they don't. They think they're under their skin. They think that they're constantly biting them, and there is nothing there. And they are incredibly insistent on it. You have to approach these individuals a little bit more cautious. They tend to kind of latch on to folks. They become incredibly desperate. They will bring in a ton of evidence. I mean, I had people bring me in like giant trash bags filled with their towels, or water from their wash, or, you know, some of them will even dig out the scabs from their skin and put them onto paper and want me to look at them because they could swear that there's some sort of like mite or some sort of like worm or bug underneath their skin. Yes, Rebecca. I've had people pass me over papers with bloody scabs taped onto them. So they're not necessarily in the right headspace. And so for those, if you look at this pest note, trying to hand them something like this at times will offend them, because then you're kind of calling them out on them not having these things on their bodies. But I would just tell them that you're not doctors. There's no doctors there. They have to go to the doctors, and typically they have, and the doctors have told them nothing, but it kind of gets them out of the office. Some of them will typically go online, and there's a lot of other individuals that are like them, and will tell them that they're right. So here's an example. I found this site because someone had given me a call, and she thought she had bird mites on her, and she looked at this website, and this looks like a legit website, right? It's, I mean, like, look how nice it is. You've got find qualified local exterminators, frequently asked questions, infestation tips and strategies, and it's a really nice looking website. And so I started digging into this because the woman kept telling me, well, this person is saying that bird mites can infest you and they bite you and all of this. And I'm like, no, trust me, there's been tons and tons of research, and they don't. Once they leave their host, sometimes they'll try to bite you. They can't reproduce on human blood or anything, and so they tend to leave. So I went over to, I think, his About Me page, and this is typically how you can find these folks, is what they say. So here under the red line right here, you know, he's talking about how he bought a ULV fogger and sprayer that professional pest control operators use, even though he didn't have a license or had no idea how to use these. Somehow he was able to get his hands on some strong chemicals and wore a respirator that obviously he was not fitted for, so this is totally illegal to do. And then he says the bug spraying got so bad that it would choke me to where I could hardly breathe. And he would put 100% DEET on his skin, which would burn him. So, you know, again, these folks aren't in the right mind space. And, you know, down here, it's, you know, one of the frustrating aspects is the lack of knowledge by so-called experts. So even if I tell these folks that there's nothing there, I'm not finding anything, they don't believe you, but they kind of keep showing up. You know, he goes on to talk about how he's like moved places, he's thrown furniture away, but still somehow these, you know, bird mites latch onto him. He's even got a fact page where he talks about how they choose specific people. He's got symptoms on there. I mean, it's really sad to see that there's individuals like this, but you can see why you don't want to engage with these individuals is because they'll just kind of keep coming after you because they want a solution. So just kind of watch out for those. You know, again, some of the characteristics is they'll start telling you about bites, but they'll bring in samples and you can't find anything on them, and they tend to bring in a lot of samples. Whereas most people, even if they have like a few fleas, they'll give you like a small half-inch strip of tape and you're going to be able to find some fleas on there. Okay, so we're done with the grossies. Let's go on to diagnosing arthropod problems. Okay, so some of the evidence that you guys should keep in mind to kind of help you figure out what folks are seeing out there or what's possibly attacking their plants. I kind of tried dividing this up the best way I can, but you know, I'm completely open to suggestions because I try to better this every year. So at the very end, if you guys have any suggestions, I would love to hear them. Okay, so there's honeydew and sooty mold. So honeydew is a rich sugary substance that's secreted by some arthropods. So here you can see an aphid pretty much secreting the honeydew from its butt. A lot of the soft scale. Do you guys remember one of the big differences between soft scale and hard scale? So the soft scale are the ones that secrete honeydew. The hard scales don't. And the hard scales are the ones that kind of look like little round flying saucers. So soft scale will secrete honeydew. Psyllids will secrete honeydew, and whitefly will secrete honeydew. So typically when you see honeydew around, you know that it's going to be one of these arthropods here. If you see a lot of ants in the area, usually that's going to tell you that you have some sort of scale there, because the ants pretty much tend to the to either the aphids, the scale, not so much the psyllids. It tends to just be like the aphid and the scales. Sometimes the whitefly, so they can kind of like move them around and start new colonies. So you'll tend to see a lot of ants within there. And then once they start dropping some of the honeydew, it'll start forming a lot of the secondary sooty mold. So usually when you see sooty mold around here like this, then you know it's guaranteed that you're going to get some of the honeydew secreting arthropods. Or you'll sometimes see leaves that look like this, where they're really shiny, or even on the ground. Sometimes some of the trees that get a lot of the scale on them, you'll get a lot of honeydew on the sidewalk and you step over it because it looks a little bit wet, but it's going to be a little bit like sticky. There's also white chalky excrements that's secreted by the glassy winged sharpshooter, and in Ventura County we have a nice abundant population of glassy winged sharpshooters. So typically the white chalky excrement will look like this right here, or you'll see it on the ground. It's not going to be as white, but it'll kind of be like a dusting of white. On the underside of leaves, sometimes you can see their egg masses, which kind of look like a smear of mud. So here you can see some of the holes where some of the larvae came out, and here you have another one that's just forming, and typically this is what they look like. You'll also see some fecal excrements from some of the arthropods. So if you see something like this black tarry stuff on the bottom of the leaf, typically that's due to thrips. Caterpillars tend to leave these little pellets behind, so that's their frass or their poop. And the larger that these little poop blocks are, then the larger your caterpillar is going to be. So they just kind of keep getting bigger as they go through each individual instar, and as they get bigger, their poops get bigger. There's also the cottony, waxy arthropods, and they tend to leave behind some of that cottony, waxy material. So you'll either see the scale on there, or some of them, like the giant whitefly here, will kind of secrete these like giant free-flowing little waxy hairs on your plant. The woolly whitefly, even when they're gone, it'll kind of look a little bit like some sort of mold, you know, like powdery mildew on your plant. But if you look closely, it's actually the woolly whitefly, or the mealybug leaves a similar residue on there. For webs and tents, some of the spider mites, you'll see some of this webbing. It can either be, depending on the infestation levels, it'll either be really thick and covering the entire plant, or you'll just see like small little amounts of it. And every now and then you can, if the plant still has like some green on it and they're still feeding, you'll see some of the individuals like you do here kind of using this to bridge them from one area to another. Tent caterpillars, if you go up to like Ojai, sometimes up off the 150, you'll see some of the plants or some of the trees out there. I have no idea what type of trees there are. I have to ask Dr. Danner about that. But you'll see some of these like really thick webbings going across the tree, and then once the caterpillars hatch, you'll just see thousands of these just crawling all over. Casings after molting. So with the hand lens, the 20X hand lens, you can see some of the old casings from spider mites. So you may not see the mites on there, but you'll see their old casings. The same thing with aphids. You'll see these little flattened out little casings on a leaf. The cicadids, you'll see them stuck onto trees or onto walls. So any questions on those? Or are we good? Okay, I'll assume with no messages then. Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Okay, so some of the plant symptoms. So something to remember from the last class, all arthropods have specific mouth parts which will cause specific damage. So what are the two basic feeding patterns? Do you guys remember? If anyone can type it in. Yes, thank you, Alexa. Thank you, Christina. So yeah, it's chewing and piercing and sucking. So typically you've got the chewing, things like a beetle, piercing, sucking tends to be like, I know what you meant, Christina. So the piercing, sucking are the ones that kind of have that like needle-like mouth part that they stick into plants, and then that's how they can also transfer specific diseases. Also to keep in mind are the life stages. So for a lot of the arthropods that undergo incomplete metamorphosis, so something like the Bagrata bug, where the nymphs basically look similar to the adults, it's just the adults are bigger and may have a little different color pattern. Typically, these are the bugs that will feed on the same plant throughout their life stages. And those that undergo complete metamorphosis, usually the larvae are the most damaging. There are some exceptions. There are some beetles where both the larvae and the adults are damaging. But for something like moths or butterflies, typically it's going to be the caterpillar stage that's the most damaging to plants. So if you see tattered, chewed plant parts, those are going to be pests with chewing mouth parts. So skeletonized leaves, typically that's going to be either caterpillars or some sort of adult beetle. So a lot of the times the moth and butterfly larvae, they'll completely chew the leaves all around the main vein and also the other smaller veins. A lot of the times they do this to avoid any of the toxins that plants are producing. So if you look at some of the monarchs, when they're feeding on the milkweed, they tend to actually break open this main leaf right here, or this main vein, and they'll kind of let the plant bleed out a little bit so that all the toxins will go to that area because the plant's trying to protect itself. Once the toxins get a little bit more diluted, they'll start taking in those toxins, and they'll actually use them for their own defense. And a lot of times that's why they taste really bad when birds eat them. And they're also able to feed on the milkweed, is because they do get used to that toxin once they dilute it out a bit. If you see notches, so these really bad looking notches or some of those like awful looking notches on the petals of flowers, those typically are going to be beetles or earwigs as well. You know, they're not very delicate about it. It's like taking a bite out of a sandwich, so they're not perfectly round looking notches taken out of it compared to something like a leafcutter bee. So if you see these like little perfect half moons here, typically that's going to be one of these ladies here taking some of the leaves out for their nest. So if you look at the difference between those nice looking notches and this messiness right here, or the way that these plants are skeletonized, very, very different. Typically, a lot of these notches you're also going to see from plants in the rose family. If you see divots or small holes, a lot of the times you'll see these in your brassicas, like your cabbage or your broccoli, and they're not necessarily on the edges, but sometimes they'll start here in the middle of the plant. Typically, that's going to be something like a flea beetle. And they're super tiny, they're really shiny. Once you get close to them, they're going to kind of jump away. But the little divots and the holes are super, super tiny, and you'll just start seeing more and more of them as the population increases. If you see chewed holes in the fruit, you know, again, you're talking about something like caterpillars, earwigs, beetles. Pill bugs can also chew that. The bites are going to be a little bit smaller with the pill bugs and the sow bugs, and they'll also go after your seedlings. They really don't tend to go after the full-grown plants. If you see fruit that's got the outside eaten, much like the snail, typically that's what it's going to be, like a snail or a slug. So they're just going to be eating the outside of the fruit. Some of the chewed roots, you can have some of the beetle larvae, like the masked chafers here, or it can also be fly larvae. So here are some onion maggots, and sometimes you'll see them on your carrots as well, or some of the wire worms in your lawn. And the wire worms, they'll come out as these click beetles, but the larvae look a little closer to the beetle larvae, like the masked chafers. If you see these like nice little silvery trails, especially on your citrus, this is on manzanita here, this is on tomato, but they really do like citrus, it tends to be a leaf miner. And that's where the larvae is feeding in between the bottom and the top of the plant's leaf. For the bleached yellow or bronze or stippled plants, those are going to be pests with piercing or sucking mouth parts. So some of the stippling and bronzing, that's going to tend to be spider mites, especially if you start seeing this type of stippling. And then as they start feeding more and more, it'll turn into kind of this bronzing because the leaf is just slowly dying. This coarse stippling, can you guys see the difference between that? So here you've got, it looks like someone just kind of took a little needle of yellow and punched it all over these different types of leaves. Here it looks like someone actually, it's like little scratches on the leaves. Those tend to be due to like leaf hoppers or also sometimes thrips. So thrips also has this other coarse stippling. And the reason is for the spider mites, they're actually jabbing in their proboscis in there and they're feeding out of individual cells. With the coarse stippling, the leaf hoppers and the thrips are scratching at the surfaces, and then they're taking that in. And so it's the scratching that's giving it that coarse stippling. The dieback of plant parts or entire plants, those tend to be pests with both types of mouth parts. So for trees, usually those are going to be boring moths and beetles. And for those guys and gals, the larvae bore into the stems and the trunks. They bore into different parts of the plant where it can interfere with water and nutrient uptake. Usually if you start peeling back the bark, you'll start seeing these little tiny tunnels right underneath. It can weaken or kill branches or areas, and large infestation can eventually kill a tree. So something like bark beetles, they become a huge problem because the more and more you get and the higher the population, they'll really start taking some of the trees down. Some of them pupate in the tree, so they'll go through their life stages inside. Let me see. Yes, it will be. So Cruz is asking if the presentation will be available. Yes, it is. So no worries on that. Just take down whatever you don't see on the actual screen. And, you know, and again, if there's something that wasn't clear, you know, by all means, please contact me. I know like the Zoom classes are a little bit more difficult because I do tend to go a little bit faster. So I apologize for that. Okay, so some pupate in the tree, others will pupate outside and then fall down into the soil. So those are a little bit, the ones that pupate in the tree are a little bit hard to control. So for the ones that attack the tree, so here's the larvae of the eucalyptus longhorn beetle, which is this beetle right here. This is the damage that it can do to a eucalyptus tree. So you can see that all the leaves here, you've had a lot of die back on these branches over here. So typically they'll go in there, here's the larvae, they'll start boring in and they'll start girdling. And of course, that's going to interfere with the nutrient and water uptake, so you'll start seeing dieback in those areas.
And Anna, there was a question. Oh, I'm sorry. There's a question. Yeah. What is the definition of a pupate?
Oh, so that's the stage. Let me go back. That is the resting stage. So similar to a butterfly, it's going to be this stage. So it's the resting stage when they're going from the larvae to the adult. And then that stage, you know, depending on what arthropod it is, the timing can be different. So with the caterpillar, typically they'll go and they'll form the chrysalis somewhere else, you know, away from the plant. So for some of these beetles, what they'll do is that they'll just emerge outside of the tree. The larvae will fall to the soil and then they'll spin their own cocoon. And then they'll stay in the soil up until they become adults, and then they'll emerge. Does that make sense?
Yes, that was good. Thank you.
Okay. 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 So Polyphagus shothole borer, you know, you guys have heard about this beetle. Okay, there it is. So it's an ambrosia beetle that carries fusarium. It's associated with about 200 different tree species, but it doesn't infect all 200, but it does infect things like avocado, box elder, coast live oak. So it's been a little detrimental down south. The adult female bores into the bark. She creates a bunch of those galleries or those little tunnels, spreads the fungus, lays eggs. The larvae hatch, feed on the fungus, and they basically repeat the cycle within the same plant. The good thing is they're not necessarily super mobile. The way that they're going to be getting around is through humans carrying them back and forth. So if you guys have seen a lot of the campaign saying, you know, burn it where you buy it, it's so that we don't move these types of beetles from one area and put them in a different area where they can start infesting somewhere else. So the adult females are incredibly small. Here's kind of like a little size comparison to a dime. So here's the female, there's the male, and then you can see how small their entry hole is. Gall wasps, they don't tend to be too much of a problem. For some reason, oak tends to have a lot of different types of gall wasps. But sometimes if they get to be a little too much, people really don't like the way that their oak trees look. So there's the two-horned gall wasp that will form these tiny little galls, which you can see right here on the oak leaves. And it kind of gives the leaves a little like scorched look. But usually people aren't going to tell the difference between whether that's just that was like due to the drought or a lack of water versus the gall wasp. But, you know, again, if someone brings you in a sample like this, if you turn it around and you see these tiny little galls, then you know it's a wasp and it has nothing to do with their watering.
Anna, there's another question about native arthropods versus non-native, and if a native will kill a tree or not.
Typically not. A lot of these things tended to be introduced in some way, shape, or form. And then usually the ones that are huge, or typically the ones that are problematic, those are the ones that don't have any natural enemies around, and that's why they're problematic.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Let me put this over. Okay. So the distortion of plant parts, again, that's going to be passed with both types of mouth parts. So for aphids, usually you'll see a lot of this type of leaf curl, and it tends to have to do with their population. So something like this picture on the left-hand side, that's going to be a higher aphid population. And with those, you'll, again, typically see ants around there. You'll see some of the sooty mold around there because they're secreting the honeydew. But this very tight, curled, crinkled look is definitely going to be aphids. They can also cause some of these weird type of galls on poplar trees. So here with the gall wasps, you know, again, since they're wasps, they do have chewing mouth parts. And so when you see the exit holes, they'll be nice round little holes because they're chewing their way out. With the aphids, you'll see this weird growth on the petiole of the poplar leaf, and then it'll be an open mouth, kind of like a frog. And the open mouth is because they can't chew their way out of there, so they basically use their piercing, sucking mouth parts, and it creates that nice little mouth for them to exit the gall. Thrips feeding, causes scarring or bronzing. So on avocados, typically you'll see some of this scarring, which, you know, a lot of folks don't like to see on their fruit. They'll also have some leaf distortion or scarring, you know, again, because they're kind of scratching at the leaf surfaces or on your fruit, then you'll see that weird kind of coarse yellow scratching on your leaf, or you'll see some of the scabbing on your leaf. For these weird fruit distortions, you know, this picture here, or the red berries on blackberries where, you know, this is supposed to be a blackberry, but the more mites that are on there, they're not allowing these little drupelets to actually turn black, and they're just not going to ripen. They're going to stay red. They're going to stay hard. So you're really not going to want to eat fruit like this. It's just going to taste bad. That's caused by these small, tiny, microscopic areophid mites. So these are the ones that look like little carrots with their hands kind of like sticking up. So, you know, when you see tiny distortions like this typically starts when these tiny little mites start feeding. So for the berries, they'll be in the flowers, and as soon as the green fruit starts to form, they'll kind of start coming in, and during the red fruit phase, they'll kind of start feeding. And then again, depending on how many little drupelets they start feeding on, that's how many drupelets aren't going to turn black. With this lemon, it's pretty similar, where it'll start feeding once the fruit starts to form. If eaten, are the mites still present? No. So the mites tend to go away once this fruit starts developing, and then they'll just go to a different fruit. But they do stay in the area, so if you don't take care of the problem, then they're going to be there next year. For leaf rollers, the larvae tend to feed on new growth just because it's a little bit more tender, it's easier to deal with. The fruit can become misshapen and distorted, much like you see this, I think that's supposed to be an apple. Yeah, this apple right here, or even on the leaves. Sometimes it'll start feeding on the leaves, but it'll have the leaves roll over, so you'll see kind of like this curled shape to the leaves, but you can see that some of the notches have been taken out, and then you'll also see a little bit of webbing on there. For the gall wasps, again, you'll see these little galls formed on a lot of the plants that they go after. Okay, so will you touch on the best way to get rid of these pests? Yep, I will. So that's the second part. Okay, so psyllid feeding. Psyllids can cause leaf distortion and divots and rolling, leaf drop, and spreads diseases. So for like pepper psyllids, if you go to your pepper trees and you turn the leaves over, you'll see a lot of these tiny little divots. And if you use your hand lens, you'll see these tiny little kind of like flying saucer looking things on there. A lot of the times people don't see the adult, which is up here, because the adult is mobile, whereas the nymphs are not. They can also cause the tightening and rolling of leaves similar to the leaf rollers. The only difference is with the leaf rollers, you can see that it's kind of more like a taco shape, whereas the psyllid feeding here is more like little tight taquitos. The Asian citrus psyllid, you know, again, we touched on that a few weeks ago, and I know you guys have been beaten over the head with the Asian citrus psyllid. I wish there were a taquito tree. That is something I would love to see. So for the Asian citrus psyllid, you know, again, we don't deal with that. CDFA does. Just make sure to call the hotline or give folks that call, and if they suspect that they have it, the hotline, because the extension isn't directly supposed to deal with it. Okay, so does everyone want to take a break right now, like a quick, maybe like 5-minute break, and then come back, or do you want me to just kind of keep going?
Feel free to unmute yourselves or type in the chat box. Keep going, sounds good. Let's see, a couple responses. Anybody else, any comments? If we see a break, maybe just a 5-minute break. Let people run to the restroom.
Okay.
So it's 1:54 right now. So let's be back by at least 2 o'clock, and we'll resume at 2 o'clock.
Okay.
All right, okay, we need a taco.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. You guys can all hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, let me put this group chat to the side. So everyone's good. Everyone got a taco and a bunch of coffee, and apparently there's no bathroom line, which is great. I guess there's some perks.
But is there toilet paper?
Okay. I know. Yeah, true. Trade toilet paper for a taco. I don't know. We can start like bargaining here. Okay. So I can't remember who had asked the question on controlling arthropods. So this is what this next section is about. Thank you guys again so much for being such troopers. I am really enjoying reading your comments and having your questions. Again, if you don't want to type anything, at the very end, I am happy to answer any question you have. Okay, so on to the next slide. Okay, so we went over some of the things that you should kind of look for in trying to determine what could potentially be wrong with your plant in terms of whether or not it's arthropod damage and what type of arthropod. Once you figure that out, then you're going to have to give them advice as to how to successfully control them, because that's something that they are going to ask. Always make sure to look at the UC IPM website. We're not allowed to recommend anything to individuals that has not been scientifically proven, and it's because we don't really want folks to use snake oil out there, or we don't want to give them the wrong advice. But when you are recommending some sort of treatment, or even if you've got your garden, one of the best things that you can do is to integrate a good integrated pest management program. And you guys have probably heard the term IPM, or integrated pest management, going around. Some folks know what it is, others have no idea. So it's pretty much a program that combines cultural, biological, chemical, and physical controls in order to either prevent or decrease pests. So this is a nice little chart that the Entomological Society of America had come up with, and I just really liked it because it gives you, like, the definition of what IPM is. It is a science-based approach that combines a bunch of different tools. So here are some of the tools. It's, altering your surroundings, adding beneficials, grow plants that are resistant, disrupt the insect behavior, using chemistries. So it's combining all of these different tools. It also tells you that you have to identify and monitor your pest, so you're not treating something that really isn't there. Evaluating whether or not treatment is actually necessary. Trying to use preventative methods to either prevent the pest from getting onto your plants, or to try to prevent them from coming back once you've managed their populations. taking some action if needing to, and also monitoring so that you can, again, start the cycle. Okay, so what is our question? What about grasshoppers? Will you be talking about them, their damage, and how to control them? Not necessarily grasshoppers per se, but we can definitely touch on that. So we can see which action we should take. Okay, so by implementing an IPM program, what should the effects look like? So with IPM, you know, again, the goal is preventing or keeping pests at tolerable levels. Remember, there are times where we don't necessarily want to get rid of our pests 100% because there's a lot of beneficial organisms out there that require those pests as food. If there's no food, then your beneficial isn't going to want to stick around. I mean, with the current situation that we're going through right now, imagine, well, the supermarkets having no food. Imagine if they didn't stock up again. What are the odds that you're going to want to go to that supermarket? Or what if there were no delivery services? You know, what are the odds that you're going to stay in the same area and say, well, there's no food here. I think I'm good. Arthropods are the same way. You know, they're not going to want to stick somewhere where they don't have food. And so you kind of want to just keep them at that tolerable level. Preventing are the ones that you just really don't want out there. And you want to do that with minimum impact on human health, the environment, and also non-target organisms. So you've got the cultural, the biological, chemical, and the physical aspects that make up this whole IPM model. So what does it exactly look like in practice? Because it's like, what does cultural look like? What does biological look like? Chemical, people know about pesticides. Physical, what does that look like? So something like the cultural practices, you know, using resistant varieties. So you hear about people breeding different plants, and the reason that they're breeding these different plants is to kind of get different characteristics of them. So there are specific diseases that, say, strawberry are very susceptible to, and there's some areas where those diseases are prevalent. You don't want to get those varieties and plant them in there because then you're going to have to use a lot of chemicals in order to keep your plant alive. And that's just not sustainable, and it's not good for the environment, and, you know, economically, it's not a very good decision as well. And so you want to plant a resistant variety. And those are varieties that exhibit less damage compared to some of the other varieties under the same pest pressure. It's not saying that the plants are not going to get those diseases. It's just that they're not going to die as easily, or they can chug along for the entire season a bit better than some of the varieties that are susceptible to that disease. And by planting these resistant varieties, you then cut down on some of the chemistries that you would have to use to otherwise keep those plants alive. Crop rotation and diversity, especially in small areas. So you want to rotate crops as often as you can. You know, you don't want to plant the same crops in the same area year after year, because with monocropping, that tends to bring on a lot of pests and diseases. You know, and especially if you're like a home gardener or a small grower, this is a little easier to do. Let me see what there is a question here. So are resistant varieties usually GMO, or are they often naturally occurring through selection? So the GMO ones are the ones that you hear about. So they tend to be the big ones like corn, soybean, wheat, some of those. So a lot of the other plants, the breeders do it through selection. So like with strawberries, that's why it takes about 9 years to get a new variety out, is because typically when you're crossbreeding with a bunch of other plants, you will maybe get a plant that is resistant to a specific disease, but it's very susceptible to another pest like mites, or the yield isn't very high, or the shelf life is pretty low. So it takes a lot of crossing to try to get some of those, you know, quote unquote resistant varieties. And even then, you know, they still may be resistant to one pathogen or pest, but then a little more susceptible to something else. So there's always these trade-offs. It's just so you have to think about it in terms of your specific area. Did that answer your question, Linda? Okay. Okay. You also have to keep in mind healthy plants. Unhealthy plants are easier to attack. Their immune system tends to be low, similar to how we are. You know, if we're not healthy, if we're feeling a little ill, or, you know, our bodies are just not up to par, we tend to get sick a little bit easier. Plants are the same way, so make sure to have that proper irrigation and fertilization to try to decrease the stress. Something to also keep in mind is if you've got things like fruit trees or plants that produce fruit, when they're producing that, they're also going to be in a high stress time, so that's going to be the time when a lot of pests try attacking them. So keep an eye on them during that time. Sanitation is another cultural practice that you can use to kind of decrease pests. So having lots of weeds or old crops or rotting fruit all over is basically a breeding ground for various pests. So if you've got a lot of this like rotting fruit here, you're going to tend to get a lot of like fruit flies. If you've got a lot of weeds in the vicinities close by, then you have a lot of pests that kind of hang out there, and then they'll just kind of breed. And then as soon as these weeds start dying off or your plants look a little bit better, then they'll migrate into your area. And these weeds can also compete with your plants for nutrients and space. Let me see. Okay, so pro weeds. So here, keeping a few weeds around can be beneficial. What you don't want is you don't want it to get crazy out of control. So you do want a few weeds out there because they actually can serve as food sources for some of the beneficials. So you do get some of the natural enemies that go out there. Plus, if you have a few of the pests on the weeds, then again, they can provide some of the food for your beneficials if there is none in your garden yet. You want to maintain those weeds and not have them out of control. Let me see, what about companion planting? Supposedly, some plants benefit by the proximity of other specific plants. Yes, so there are things like companion planting. I have I think the name of the book, and I don't think it was Carrots Love Tomatoes, but maybe we're talking about the same book, John, because that sounds familiar, but I'm not sure if it was like Carrots Love Tomatoes. But there is a book out there that talks about companion planting, so that is also something else that you can use. So that's another cultural practice. Handpicking of your pests. You know, if there's just a few of them out there, there's no need for chemicals if you can just like pick them right off. You know, if there's just like a few snails out there, you can pick those off. If there's a few bugs out there, you can either like vacuum them off or kind of hose them off, which is the next one. where, you know, for some of the scale insects like whitefly or cochineal, scales, or aphids, you can just get a power washer as long as it doesn't damage the plant. Like, you don't want to do a power washer on this plant. But if it's something like your cactus pads and you have cochineal on it and you don't want the cochineal to be on there because it's starting to take over, you can just jet them right off. You can also add a drop of dish detergent at 1% and spray it onto your plants, and that can act as a pesticide as well. Just make sure to test it on a small patch to make sure it doesn't burn your plant, because it can burn off the cuticle. Using barriers is another way to kind of try to prevent some of the pests. So some of this insect netting that you see some of the smaller growers use, and you can definitely use it in your home garden. Just make sure that the netting isn't resting on the plants. So that's what these little hoops here are for, is to kind of keep that netting up. If the netting rests on the plants, some of those arthropods with the sucking mouth parts are still going to be able to stick their proboscis through the netting and get to your plant. There's also barriers that you can use. So this is a copper barrier for some of the snails. So what's going to happen is that these little frillies kind of try to prevent them from continuing up the tree. But as they get close to it and once they start gliding on it, it basically shocks them. And they'll fall down and they're not going to want to go back up that tree. Okay, does it matter soap versus detergent, or just keep it small? Usually I like to use soap just because it's kind of a little easier to mix in, but just make sure that it's a small amount. Like you want that 1%, and you can definitely use a little bit less. The copper is genius. It's kind of it's a cool concept of, you know, kind of like licking a battery. You just won't do it again once you've done it. So some baits and traps that you can use, and I've actually used both of these, especially the earwigs during a rainy season. You know, right now we're getting a lot of these spring rains, and so you're probably gonna start seeing a lot more earwigs. They tend to really like the moisture, and they really pop out when we have these rains. And having a few of them around, you know, again, they're one of those arthropods that act as both a beneficial and a pest. You know, they're beneficial because they will eat other smaller arthropods, and they'll kind of stick around in your compost and eat some of the stuff there. But when their populations really get up, they can start eating your seedlings or your artichokes. They really seem to love the artichokes. And so you may not want as many around. So with both of these, you know, you don't need any of these little fancy baits or anything. You know, you can use like a little tin can or just some sort of like small container that you can put these ingredients in. So for snails, you can add like beer and sugar water and yeast, kind of mix it together, let it sit for a few hours. And if you want, you can just kind of bury the can so it's easier for them to kind of go over. They're going to slide on over because they're going to be attracted to the beer, sugar, water, yeast, and they'll basically just drown. For the earwigs, you want a little bit of vegetable oil at the bottom of the tin can. And you can either use like bacon grease, or what I used to use are those fish oil pills, the ones that actually smell. And I would just squeeze in a fish oil pill inside of the tin can right here. You don't need to bury it or anything, because the earwigs will just climb up the plant. They'll go down to the bottom trying to eat whatever they think is in there, and they'll basically die and get smothered by the vegetable oil. With veggie oil, bacon grease, and fish oil attract raccoons and skunks, other rodents. You know, I didn't really have a problem with that. So, I mean, I'm assuming you don't want to put a lot of it on there. So you don't want to fill the can with vegetable oil. I'm talking you want it to barely be covering the bottom of the tin can, because the earwigs just need to actually hit the oil. Once they hit the oil, it's going to be hard for them to come out, and they're eventually going to slide down, and then they'll just end up drowning in the oil. So you don't want a lot of this. So it's probably enough for the earwigs to actually smell it and go to the bait, but not enough for any of the rats to go over there and try to get it. But I could tell you, if you have a lot of earwigs, you're going to have to clean these traps out every single night, because I would get hundreds of these. Okay, so biological control. This is actually my favorite type of control to use, because it's something that I've worked with for numerous years, working at the extension. And, you know, I mean, it's basically bugs killing other bugs. You know, you can't get any cooler than that. And just watching how they do what they do is absolutely fascinating to me. So there's different types of biological control. So the first one are pathogens. So pathogens are bacteria, viruses, and fungi that cause diseases in pests. So something like bacillus. BT is, you know, something that a lot of folks have heard of. You can buy it at the garden store. It's a naturally occurring bacterium. It's used as a biopesticide. It tends to be OMRI certified, and it's considered organic. And there's different types of BT strains, and it's going to depend on what pest you would like to get rid of. So some of them are better for caterpillars, other ones are better for other arthropods. So make sure to read the label to know which one you should be using. And typically, you know, depending on the strain, they do act in different ways, but usually it's that the pest has to ingest the BT, so you spray it onto your plants. The pest starts munching on it, and it'll either cause its mouth parts to stop working, so they can't feed and they end up starving and dying, or it basically messes with their stomach, and they basically start like melting from within, and then they end up dying. So they'll end up looking like this unhappy looking caterpillar. So that was the caterpillar before it started eating BT. That's after it started eating BT. So who was it that asked about the grasshoppers? I'm trying to, oh, Lori. Okay, so Lori, you were asking about grasshoppers. So something like BT is something that you could use. The nice thing about BT is that it tends to be, you know, somewhat narrow ranged. So the only things that it's really going to affect are like one, it doesn't affect any mammals or anything else except for arthropods. And even depending on the strain, some strains only affect specific arthropods. But they have to actually be consuming the plant in order to be affected. Things like pollinators, you don't have to worry about those. You know, of course, like read the label. If it tells you not to spray it when the plants are flowering, then you're not going to spray it when the plants are flowering. But if you've got something like, you know, you're growing lettuce or you're growing cabbage, then there's not going to be flowers on there. And so you can go ahead and spray the BT, and whatever caterpillars or beetles are munching on your plant, those are the things that BT is going to control. The next type of pathogen are the entomopathogenic fungi. which pretty much is a fungus that acts as a parasite on the arthropod. And, you know, again, these, depending on what species you're using, they can either be broad range or narrow range. So some of the narrow range ones will only attack, you know, like true bugs. So you want to try to stick with those as much as possible. But pretty much what it does is when the bug starts crawling on the areas that you sprayed, this fungi gets onto it and it starts pretty much growing on the bug, and its nutrients come from basically feeding on the bug. And so it'll start out with a small little white patch, and then the more that the fungus grows, then it'll start growing all over the bug, and it'll eventually kill them. Another type of biocontrol, so you've got the pathogens, now it's the parasitoids. And these are super, super cool. It's basically like aliens. So you typically have the parasitoid, and they tend to be small little tiny wasps. And they go over, some of them attack specific species of pests. Other ones will just go after, say, that type, like aphids versus just green peach aphid. And let me see, there's a question. Let me see, if you live near a nature area, is there a concern that these may not be targeted to the problem species and may impact natives? Are you, Candace, are you talking about the parasitoids or the pathogens? The pathogens. No, not really, because they don't really have residual. So a lot of the organic products, you have to spray them typically 2 to 3 times more often than you would a conventional, because they really don't last. So timing of application is incredibly important. It's not, BT isn't one of those biopesticides that you can spray even a few days before you start seeing pests. You have to time it to where you don't have an infestation, but you at least have some that you're not going to have to spray over and over and over again. So you want to kind of try to decrease those sprays, but typically they're not gonna stick around. So you don't have to worry about any of the effects in natural areas. And with the pathogens, it's the same thing. And with the pathogens like the entomopathogenic fungi, one of the issues is, you know, it is a fungus that needs humidity, and we just don't really have it here. So a lot of that type of biocontrol works very well somewhere like in the Pacific Northwest or in places like Florida where the humidity is really high. Coastal California, San Joaquin Valley, those areas, there's not enough humidity to actually get them to work. Somewhere in a greenhouse, they would work well, but they're not going to work if you spray them out in your garden. They're not going to work as well. BT does, but, you know, again, you don't have to worry about it getting out to the natural areas. Okay, so let's go back to the parasitoids. Okay, so with the parasitoids, you have this small wasp here, and the host is this aphid. So the female comes over, and she's about the size of an aphid. So you can see this picture right here. She's emerging from the aphid casings. You're welcome, Candace. So she'll go over, and she'll fly right next to one of the aphids, quickly sting it with her ovipositor. And when she's stinging the aphid, she's basically laying an egg. Her egg will hatch, and the larvae will basically start consuming the aphid while it's alive. And at first, the aphid will be walking around and doing its thing. And after some time, it's going to basically not feel very well because it's pretty much getting eaten from the inside. And they'll kind of start turning a black color, and then they'll start blowing up like a big float balloon, and they'll kind of just stop walking at some point. When they are kind of this like weird, puffy looking gray color, you're just going to see them stuck onto a leaf. And that's when the larvae of the wasp is pupating. So it's forming a cocoon within this aphid body. And after some time, it'll basically saw a little hole and emerge out of the aphid. So, you know, again, it's sort of like aliens where, excuse me, you have something growing in you, but it's going to eventually kill you and just kind of like pop out. So some parasitoids lay their eggs either inside of the host adult. Other ones will lay their eggs on the host adult. So if you ever see any of the tomato hornworms and they've got these weird little, they kind of look like little carpets walking around. These are little eggs of a small, tiny little wasp. And those eggs will basically hatch and start eating the caterpillar alive. Sometimes the caterpillar survives, other times it doesn't. Odds are this one right here is not going to survive because of all of these eggs. So the eggs will just hatch and start eating the caterpillar. Other wasps will attack the eggs of their host. So here's a little wasp, and she's going to go up to the eggs, and she's going to lay her egg inside. Her egg's going to hatch, and that larvae is going to consume the little embryo that's inside this egg, and also all of the nutrients. Okay, so the difference between a parasite versus a parasitoid. So true parasites tend to be much smaller than the host. They live a shorter time. They often reproduce within the host, and they often don't kill the host. So an example are tapeworms or fleas. You know, sometimes they can transmit diseases, but it's not the parasite itself that's killing the host. So some, you know, like a tapeworm, I guess, you know, if you keep it inside of you, I don't know why you would want to do that. You know, eventually it can kill you, but they really don't want to, because they kind of want to keep like reproducing and potentially get into a different host. Parasitoids, on the other hand, that term was coined in 1913, and it was to describe those insects that parasitize and kill their insect host. So they will get into your body, and there is going to be no surviving them, pretty much. Is they are going to take all of your nutrients, and they tend to be somewhat about the same size, and they'll eventually kill you. So you would, if you had a choice of either having parasites or being parasitized, you'd want the parasites. The third type of biocontrol, so we've gone through pathogens, we've gone through parasitoids, so now it's the predators. The predators tend to be either around the same size or larger than their prey. They can either be generalist, meaning that they focus on either a specific species or a specific group of arthropods, or they can be generalist, where they will basically eat whatever is in their way, including other members of the same species. So sometimes they'll cannibalize each other. So something that sometimes can be somewhat of a specialist are some of the ladybird beetles. Sometimes they only go after, you know, aphids or a certain type of aphid. There are other species of ladybird beetles that will go after aphids, thrips, eggs, so they tend to be more generalist. This predatory mite, Persimilis here, tends to be a specialist, so it only goes after a specific genus of spider mites. You've got the lacewing larvae right here, and they tend to be generalists. They'll even cannibalize each other. So they'll go after pretty much anything that gets in their way. Does it help to relocate ladybugs? I find them on some plants, plants, but need, oh wait, where did that go? But need them on others, so I move them. Oh yeah, you can do that. And I'm gonna show you a little trick on how to actually keep your ladybugs in your garden when you get them from the garden store. Can you buy parasitoids, or you can actually buy parasitoids. They do have the eggs of parasitoids. I'm trying to think if they sell some insectaries do sell the adults, and you kind of just like let them go away. A lot of the parasitoids, you have a lot of them in your yard, especially if you have citrus and you have aphids on there. Turn the leaves around and just look for those kind of grayish, kind of puffy looking aphids on the back. And that's going to tell you whether or not you have the parasitoids. And they're super tiny, so most folks don't even notice them. I mean, they're the size of gnats. Okay, so for the predators, there are quite a bit of beneficial predators that are commercially available. So lacewings, ladybird beetles, predatory mites, predatory true bugs like this aureus species right here, the wasp parasitoids, predaceous snails, and even predaceous nematodes. So if you Google, there's some of the insectaries, like even in Ventura, you can get some from Rincon Vitova. I know that they get them from other insectaries, and they have a pretty good catalog. Yep, Associates Insectary. Brett is a great guy. I mean, all the folks that work there help me with my research. So, and they've also got the predatory snails there, which are pretty cool. So releasing beneficials, working with beneficials can be a little bit tricky because you have to have the right conditions for them to be successful. They're not like sprays. They're not going to act like sprays. You don't want to throw them out there when there's no food source and expect them to stick around. So that's where the timing gets a little bit tricky. You also don't want to throw them out there when there's this huge infestation, because they're just not going to reproduce enough to bring the populations down. So you want to try to get them out there just as your population starts building. And of course, it's, if you've got your garden out there, it's starting to like plant things that really promote the beneficials. So the releasing technique really depends on the beneficial that you're releasing and on what type of plants you're releasing them on. And as I mentioned, for the best results, make sure to have food available. If there's no food, they're going to leave. So for lacewings, if you end up getting lacewings, for the adults, they'll sometimes come in these cups. And for the green lacewings, the adults actually don't really feed. It's the larvae that do a lot of the work. For the brown lacewing, both the adults and the larvae feed, but the brown lacewing, they're really difficult to find. They're not as easy to rear as the green lacewing. But with the adults, remember, a lot of the time they're going to give you adult males and females, and so the females are going to be mated. They're going to go out and they're going to lay a bunch of eggs, and so you'll have your next generation out there. You can buy eggs, which come on these little boards, and you can either stick the boards in where your plants are, or you can hang them on your tree. You just want to make sure that they're not in direct sunlight, or where birds can come over or peck at them, or where something like the earwigs can come over and pretty much start eating them. For the larvae are cannibalistic, so I would steer clear of getting any of the larvae that come in a cup like this that are not pre-fed. And odds are, even if they are pre-fed, if they're all in the same cup, they're going to start, there's going to be a few of them missing because they'll start eating each other. So if you've ever bought any of like the praying mantis eggs, a lot of the times the instructions will tell you that as soon as they hatch, you need to throw them outside. And you need to do that because it'll start becoming the Hunger Games in the jar that they're in, or the little bag that they're in, where they will seriously just start eating each other, and whichever one is the strongest will end up becoming the fattest, and you'll be left with one. So a lot of the larvae, like when I would buy them, I would get them from places that had these little cardboards right here. And what these cardboards are, this is, they're this like kind of white clearish looking stuff is mesh, and there's mesh on this side, there's mesh on the other side, and there's these little tiny cells, and each one of those cells is a larvae. And so they make sure to separate the larvae out because they know that through the shipping process, they'll start eating each other if they don't. And so all you have to do is peel off this sheer cover on one side and just shake them onto your garden or wherever you want them. With predatory mites, typically you're going to get them in a bottle with some sort of carrier. With these, what you have to remember is typically there's going to be a little air hole here at the top. If there's one at the bottom, then they'll be at the bottom. So if it isn't a carrier, just because there's carrier in there doesn't mean your mites are on the carrier. So you want to get that bottle and gently shake it so that if either through travel, all the mites congregated towards the top, you start moving them down and you start mixing them in with this carrier, or if they're at the very bottom, that you start mixing them in. So when you start releasing them, like this woman is here, you just gently shake them onto the plant, then you're getting some of those mites out there. They also have these little bags called sachets, and I've worked with these. I really, really like these. Especially if you're like a gardener, then you can just get, you know, a few of these, and you want to put them somewhere where they're away from sunlight, where they'll get a little bit of humidity, because inside of the packet you've got some of the food for the mites. So sometimes they'll throw in some bran mites in there. And there's a little tiny hole that you can't see. It's like the size of a pinhole, and it'll either be like on this side or on the other side of this packet. And the adults pretty much start going towards the light, because inside of this packet it's going to be a little bit darker. So the adults will slowly start coming out, and they call them slow release. So instead of putting out a bulk amount of mites all at once, you can put this out there and you'll have mites for about 4 weeks. And I have put them in bags. They do actually survive for like 4 to 6 weeks. You just have to make sure that the humidity is pretty decent. You want it to be around 55%. Let me see, which arthropods do mites attack? They tend to attack other mites. So like the spider mites. So if you get a lot of spider mites on your tomato plants, then you want to release something like Persimolis or Californicus. And some of them can even eat thrips. So like Californicus can go after thrips. You're welcome. Okay, so the ladybird beetles. The ladybird beetles are pretty interesting. A lot of folks don't realize that the ones that you see in the garden stores are actually not reared. So ladybird beetles, for some reason, folks can't, I haven't really read up on the biology. That's something I really should do, because I find it fascinating that for some reason they can't rear them. And so what they do is during the winter, the ladybugs will go up really high into the mountains. And as the snow starts melting, they'll start coming down in elevation. Excuse me. And so there are some areas that are known historically around the springtime, like early spring. So for California, it's around maybe late December, early January, where you can go to certain areas and you will see thousands upon thousands of ladybugs. I think I showed you guys a picture during the last entomology class. So they'll start coming down in elevation. And a lot of the folks that sell these ladybugs that you see in the garden stores, what they do is they kind of have dibs in certain areas, and they'll just go to those areas and start shoveling all of these ladybugs into their bins, and then they'll put them into these individual little packets. The issue with that is as spring starts coming along, you're going to start seeing more and more and more ladybugs. And that's because as time goes on and it starts warming up and, you know, plants start coming up and pests start getting onto those plants, the ladybugs will come down and they're ready to be down in our elevation. When these folks get the ladybugs, they're not quite ready to be down in this elevation. It's like they kind of are in those areas because they're mating and they're getting ready to go out and start feeding. And so if you see any of these ladybugs and you've actually released them, you'll notice that they'll fly away. And most people have told me they don't work. And it's because they're not ready to be there. So you kind of have to force them to be in your garden. So one thing to do is, you know, just make sure that you do have some food there, because if you're going to force them to be in your area, you should have some food to provide them. But what you do is you get a spray. You mix a 1-to-1 ratio of water with like something like a sugary soda. You know, sometimes I'll use like 7-Up or something. So in a water bottle, I'll mix, you know, half a can of water and then half a can of 7-Up. I, you know, shake the bottle, and then I open these little bags and I basically spray them with this like sugary water solution. And what it does is it's enough sugar to seal their elytra, so their wings together, so they can't fly. But after a few days, you know, it's anywhere between like 4 to 7 days, depending on like how much of the spray got onto their body, the sugar starts wearing off and then their wings can open up again. But by that time, they've kind of acclimated to your area. They know that food is there, so they tend to stay. And that's kind of a little trick that some of the insectaries use as well. You know, it sounds kind of mean because you're forcing their wings to shut. But if you're wanting ladybugs to stay in your garden to help with your pest control, you kind of have to force them to stay there. So it's a little cool trick. Yeah, see? So Jill's saying that hers definitely fly away. So try that the next time. Another thing that you should pay attention to when buying these in the garden store is make sure to get the ones that have been refrigerated. So I know the Green Thumb on Victoria, they sometimes have some of these bags in the refrigeration section. Other bags they have hanging at the registers in room temperature. So these, they say pre-fed, but they were pre-fed before going into the bags, and you have no idea how long they have been in those bags. If they're in the refrigeration section, what that's going to do is if they've been pre-fed and you stick them in a really cool area like refrigeration, they're not going to be moving down a lot. It's going to decrease their metabolism, so that pre-fed can help them get along for a lot longer than if you stick them in room temperature where they're moving around and they're using energy and they're burning those calories, but they have nothing else to eat while they're in the packet. So if you look at a lot of those packets, you'll see that there's a lot of dead ones. And odds are, if you buy some of those, they're going to be really weak and they're going to end up dying pretty soon after. So make sure to get the ones in the refrigeration. So you've got your 3 different types of biocontrol. So the pathogens, the parasitoids, and the predators. So once you have those in your garden, you do want to try to conserve them. So if you are going to use sprays, try to select, some of the pesticides that are least disruptive to your beneficials. Try to avoid using some of those broad spectrum, and by broad spectrum, those are typically the ones where they don't have just one target. They have like this huge range of targets. I really highly recommend you guys taking the pesticide class that Julian teaches, because he goes over what the different pesticides are, how to read the labels, what pests they're going to target, what crops or plants you can use them on, what pests you can use them on, can you use them near water or not, things like that. And that's really going to help educate you on selecting the right types of pesticides, because a lot of people believe that if something is organic, it's going to be okay to use around your beneficials, and that is completely not true. There are some organic materials out there that will wipe your beneficials out. So some of the broad spectrum organics are something like some of the oils. So oils don't necessarily target just one type of pest. The way that they work is they basically smother. And so if you've got beneficials out there, they're going to get smothered as well. Something else like a spinosad tends to be very, very toxic to bees as long as it's wet, but once it's dry, it's completely fine. So make sure to check the label for any restrictions. They'll let you know what the timing is. Can you spray this while your plants are blooming? Can you use it on food crops? Do you have to watch out for pollinators? Things like that. Make sure to spot treat when possible versus just spraying everything. As I mentioned before, predators do need food. So the goal is to decrease pests to levels that are tolerable. So be okay with having some pests out there. You don't want it to where it's completely taking down your plant or it's damaging, but you want just enough for your predators to be able to be fed. So you want to try to create your own little rearing insectary. Make sure to have food available for all life stages of beneficials. So something like the syrphid fly, the larvae feeds on things like thrips and mites and their eggs, but the adult actually uses nectar for fuel. So you want those flowers out there. Let's see. What are my thoughts on snail baits? Let me think of how to answer that one. They can be used, but you have to use them properly. So I wouldn't just toss them out there. It's similar to something like the rodent baits. If you're not going to use the rodent baits properly, that's when it can be very damaging to the environment. So, there's pest control companies out there that will use the baits, but they'll make sure that they either take the rodents out or they place it in areas where they know that the rodents aren't going to come out, so that other things like owls or cats or dogs can't eat the rodents that have ingested this material. So again, this is where, you know, reading the label and knowing how to use the pesticide is incredibly important. So Docalite snail works great. That is good to know. Thank you. You know, again, this is where taking that class on how to read the label, incredibly, incredibly important. Okay, the parasitized pest. So this is what I was talking about. If you have little parasitoids, which you probably do because they tend to be all around. So this is what the aphids would look like once they're parasitized. Sometimes you'll see the little exit holes right here where the wasps had escaped, but one like this one, here, here, here. These still have the wasps inside of them, or actually not that one, there's a little hole. So the ones that don't have holes are the ones that still have this wasp inside of it. So you want to leave those out there so they can kind of stay in the area. The same thing with the psyllids over here. You can see a little perfectly round hole in them, so you know that there's been a parasitoid. If you're going to be using some of these predators, like say your ladybugs, you want to make sure to try to release them in the proper environment. So you need to help the predators get to their prey. So if there's something like you've got an aphid infestation and you have a bunch of ants tending to them, what's going to happen is when the ladybug tries going after the aphids, the ants are going to attack it. And your ladybugs aren't going to be able to take care of that problem, or they're just going to keep dying if they keep going after the aphids unless the ants aren't there. So you want to try to give your beneficials a little leg up to try to get to their pests. So it's something you can do for the ants if they're walking up and down. You can put some of like sticky material or some sort of barrier to where the ants can't cross it, but the ladybugs can definitely fly up and get to the aphids. Okay, so chemical control. As I mentioned, chemical control is part of an IPM program. So yes, they are typically used, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to make it into an integrated pesticide management program. So again, it is a tool of IPM. It is not the only tool, so it's not something that you should completely rely on. Typically, there's more residues that are left from using pesticides. If properly used, there'll be minimal effects on human and the ecosystems. So again, that's where knowing how to use them is incredibly important. So before applying any pesticides, make sure to also properly ID your pest, because some pesticides will only take care of certain pests and not other pests. So, you know, you can't use that like a can of Raid for absolutely everything. You also have to ask yourself, you know, do you really need to spray, or are there other options? Something to think about is this pest causing any sort of damage or any problems? So if it's something, you know, like we'll get some of these red bug infestations, they're an invasive species, but they really don't seem to be doing anything to either crops or to natural plants in the environment. So we really don't do anything about them. They'll come out in the thousands and then they'll go away. They really won't damage anything. So is there really a need to spray? You know, if they're getting in your home, I've told people just vacuum them up, you know, or put sealants in your window so they just can't come in, but there's really no reason to spray them. They're not doing anything. Make sure that your pest is on the label. So here in the parentheses, I had, you know, remember your last class, but since you're not going to have it this time, you know, I do highly recommend that you take that option. Regular monitoring will catch problems before they explode. So make sure, you know, if you are out there or if you're choose the proper spray for the life stage. You know, if you're using something like BT, this is the stage you want to use it at when the pests are actually consuming the plant versus a bunch of flying adults. You know, even though they're laying eggs, you're going to have to time the eggs on when they're going to hatch, and then you're going to have to do another BT spray. So when you see some of the small larvae out there, that's when you want to spray. Some monitoring techniques are, you know, just going out there and looking at your plants. You can also kind of do a little makeshift beading where you can, instead of even having this little fancy grid that he has, you can just use like a regular stick and Tupperware and kind of just beat some leaves and see what falls off. You can use pheromone traps. You'll see these in some of the trees, and what they do is that they have a scent for a specific arthropod, and it tends to be either like males or females. And then you've got stickiness up on here, so they'll fly in and they'll get stuck, so you can see what the population looks like and when they start coming out. For ants, the baits do contain pesticide mixtures with some sort of active food source. So knowing the type of ant that you're going after and what type of food they're going after, you know, some go for sugar, others go for protein, depending on whether or not they're building their colony or not. So you don't want to put a sugar trap out there, but you've got ants going for protein. If you're making your own, you know, like the borax water mixture, make sure that you have enough water in there to where the ants can't smell the pesticides, but not so much that it's diluting it. It's sometimes just easier to get the pre-made liquid baits, you know, like the taro tends to work incredibly well. And you can place it indoors. You want to place the baits off the trail. So if you see a trail of ants in your house, you don't want to just like stick it right there in front of them. What's going to happen is they're just going to go right around it. You need those scouts to actually find it. So you want to place it off the trail. The same thing if you're using these outdoor ones, you want to start placing them outdoors and get the ants out to those baits. I know I have said this numerous times, but you know, it's something that I feel I have to be incredibly responsible about, especially when we are talking about using pesticides, is to read the label carefully. So by law, you are required to follow the label, and I can tell you that most people do not do that. The label does contain directions for use, the type of arthropods and plants you can use it on, the timing, the safety attire, and when you're spraying these, you know, please, please, please make sure to wear the proper personal protective equipment. You know, again, I can tell you most folks don't, because I don't know how many times I drive down the street and I see folks just spraying out there in their shorts and sandals with no gloves. So typically, this guy up here is what I see. This is more of what you're supposed to have. So most gardeners do skimp on proper safety attire, which is, you know, long sleeve, long pants, closed-toed shoes, lined nitrile gloves, safety glasses. Know what plants, flowering or non-flowering, if it's food-bearing, when you can harvest that food after spraying, the environmental conditions. So you don't want to spray something that is going to be washed away from the rain when it's going to rain the next day. You know, keep in mind, these are the same chemicals that growers use. They're just diluted. When providing someone with pesticide information from required UC resources, you know, again, if you are going to recommend pesticides, they have to be recommended by UC. So make sure to use the UC IPM website for that, and always remind them to read the pesticide label carefully. They have to choose products that are specifically labeled for use on the plants and the arthropods that they are trying to control. Okay. So now we are going to have a quiz. Does anyone have any questions? You guys can go ahead and unmute yourselves right now, and we can, instead of like typing them out, and I can help you answer your questions that you may have. Okay, so Davida, can we help them interpret the label if they are confused? Yes, I would say yes if you have taken Julian's course and you know how to read the label. That way you can feel confident about it.
Sorry, I was just going to add, one of the reasons that we had to postpone Julian's course as opposed to doing it via Zoom is it's a very hands-on course. He has actually this giant bin filled with bottles and you pass them around the room. So it's not just a PowerPoint presentation. And so that was one of the reasons why we don't have, So as Anna suggested at the beginning, please attend that class when it gets rescheduled as continuing education. Before this situation evolved into what it was, we had bought plastic or rubber gloves and we're just planning on, simple protective measures. And then as quickly as things escalated, we realized that wasn't going to cut it. So
it is a great class. Like, I have been through it, and Julian has done such an amazing job at it. And it's not something that you can just do with a PowerPoint, because you have to like look at the bottles, you have to look at how different companies put information in different areas. And so it is, but I am recommending that if folks can take it, definitely take it. Okay, so Linda asked, why do they tend to use microscopic font on labels? Do you keep magnifying glasses in your ear? I don't, I'm at that age where it is getting harder, and I don't know if I'm supposed to keep the bottle close to my eyes or further away. And so now what I have to do is you can actually go online and just Google the name and then just put label, and I pull up the PDF label, because that to me is a lot easier to read, because I can just like zoom in and out of it. Does anyone have any other questions? Should we go on with the quiz?
Sure. So we are going to administer. I know, get excited. Okay, Rebecca says yes. So we're going to go ahead and we're actually going to administer the quiz via Zoom. So you're going to see questions popping up on the screen in front of you. I will, after this session, email you the quiz. So if you want to keep track of the answers for your record, just say, 1A, 2B, 3D. So you don't have to keep track and write down each question as we go through them on the screen. You will be emailed the quiz, so you have all the questions. Just make sure you keep track when Anna goes through the answers. Make sure you take note of what the correct answer is. But we're going to go ahead and launch the quiz now. So let me know either verbally or via the chat if you don't see these questions pop up. But we're going to go ahead and launch. Okay, so hopefully you can see the questions in front of you. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. You can? Okay. So question number one requires images. So I am going to share my screen. Yes, because I want you to be able to see the image. So hopefully now you are looking at a Microsoft Word.
Yes.
So question number one, good.
I can see it.
Okay. So question number one, and you're going to answer by the multiple choice on the screen in front of you. Which of these insects cause chewing damage? So hopefully you can see the pictures.
Answer sheet is sitting on top of the images.
Let's see. Can you click the question and drag it off to the side? I tried to move mine to the side, but that might not have made a difference. Yes.
I still can't see.
Let's see. Let me try moving it around more and see if I can position it in a way. Let me. Otherwise, go ahead and take a guess. And like I said, I'm going to send you this document as soon as we're done. And And so I believe it's set up. So once you've answered number 1, go ahead on to number 2. And then again, the last question, number 10, you're going to want to refer to this image. So I'm going to go back to number 1 for now. Hopefully you can see that. And then go ahead and work your way through the quiz. And then we'll give you a couple minutes and then we'll go through the answers. It looks like some people might be stuck on question number 1. Has anyone been able to move on to question number 2?
No.
No.
I moved on. I just picked one of the things and hit next.
And then it brought you to question number 2? Okay, so you have to submit an answer and hit next, it sounds like.
Well, now I'm stuck on 10. It scrolled to 10, but I'm stuck there.
So there's only 10 questions. So if you've made it to 10.
I know. But I mean, I missed all the other questions. I'm stuck here on 10.
Oh, let's see. Okay.
I can't scroll it now either.
See, I can end and relaunch polling, but I don't know if that's going to close the quiz for all of you that have made okay, so you're all saying you're stuck. Okay, let me end the poll and relaunch it and see what that does. So some people were able to submit answers. Oh, one person was. Okay, let's relaunch. One person cracked the code, so let's try again.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry if you were that one person that did it, because now it's going to make you redo it. And if you were that one person that did it, share how you did it, please.
Well, so I was just scrolling with my mouse up and down on the answer sheet and could walk through all of the questions.
And you could
Using the
submit
little lower
answers,
bar
Michael?
on my mouse.
Okay, so you were able to answer each of the questions by scrolling with your mouse?
Yeah.
I'm not using a mouse. I don't.
Oh, that might be the chance. So Sheila too, she said she scrolled the questions and then after she answered number 10, she hit submit. So it might be different if you're looking on a phone or an iPad. So you can, it's okay, you can follow along when we go through the answers together.
Hey, Alexa.
Yes.
So for me, I'm on a laptop with a trackpad. It takes a while for it to load. So it's not an automatic kind of thing. You just have to wait for it, I think.
Gotcha. Okay.
Alexa, could you show us the bugs for number 1, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Hopefully you can see those now. You might have to, Rebecca mentioned she had to kind of rearrange the thumbnails and different things on her screen, but hopefully you can see them now.
There's called a pesticide label.
I can see at least 3 people have completed the poll now. So if you can figure it out, great. We'll give it another minute or 2 and then we'll just go through all the questions together.
Can you like slowly navigate through the presentation? Because that's where I'm stuck. So I see where I can answer it, and I can scroll up and down to give my answers before I submit them. But the word presentation, I can't scroll past the first click.
Right, so that is my screen that we're sharing. So I'll scroll through that slowly now. It's all the same questions, and the only two where you need to refer to an image are number 1 and number 10. But yeah, I'll scroll through that now. So question number 1 was, which of these insects cause chewing damage? And that one has 4 different images, A, B, C, and D. And question number 2, a single pest can cause a single symptom, true or false?
Okay, I see it now.
You see, okay. Yeah, and I'll keep scrolling through these.
You're scrolling too fast.
Well, it should be the same questions that are on the poll that popped up through Zoom.
Let's see.
Can you just scroll to 10 quickly? Because that's my last one.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, Alexa, I'm having trouble.
Well, don't get too frustrated with this. We'll go through the answer key right now, and just, like I said, we'll send you the quiz via email in a moment here. So we can just all go through together. I don't want anyone getting too frustrated with this system because I don't understand it well myself. And the screen I'm looking at is different than you. So I'm sorry I can't be helpful.
That's okay.
It looks like at least 10 people have submitted the quiz. So I'll give it just another minute and then we'll go through the answers with Anna.
Hi, Alexa.
Yes.
Did my quiz go through?
You know what? I can't see individuals on here. It's anonymous. Maybe I should have stated that from the beginning.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
I can't tell who submitted what. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end polling and we'll see, I think, share results. So we can see the results here. So I'm going to put, can you guys all see the results now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So Anna, you're still on the line, right?
I am.
Okay, so you guys ready? We're going to go
Okay.
through the answers one by one. I'll scroll through on my page here so you can all see it.
I could go ahead and share my screen because I've got the answers up.
Perfect.
With the,
Yes.
the correct
You wanna-
answers highlighted. Okay.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and share your screen, Anna.
Okay. Let's see, where is it?
I have no control
Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
whatsoever.
Yeah, but I
It
can't
says,
scroll it.
oh, no, because it's my screen.
Oh, okay.
So I'm the one that's scrolling it. Okay. So let me make this bigger for you guys so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so for question number 1, which of these insects cause chewing damage? So there was this guy here, A, which is a true bug, the aphid B, an earwig C, and a weevil D. So actually, I actually have this wrong. The actual answer is D. I'm sorry about that. So D is the actual answer. I have to change that before I give you guys the answers. It's C and D. So out of the folks that answered that first poll, 12% got that right. So this is a true bug. They've got the piercing sucking mouth parts, similar to aphids, and earwigs and the beetles. Those are the ones that have the chewing mouth parts. So it's actually, the answer is C and D. Okay, so for number 2, a single pest can cause a single symptom. So yep, that is false. And most of you guys got that one right. Good job. Number 3, weevil larvae can consume which part of the plant? Again, you guys got that one. You got that one right. So they can consume both the roots, the leaves, and the flowers. Number 4, would you rather be parasitized or have parasites? Okay, thank God. Most of you guys want to have parasites. I mean, none of us want to have parasites, but if we had to choose. Okay, so which of these arthropods does not excrete honeydew? So aphids excrete honeydew, soft scale excrete honeydew, psyllids, and whiteflies. So the answer is C. And number 5, let me see. Ooh, it was almost a tie between thrips and whitefly. So good job. Okay, number 6. So you get a leaf sample that has webbing and yellow stippling. What could have caused those symptoms? So caterpillars would have caused the chewing damage. Thrips would have caused the coarse stippling, but no webbing. So the answer is A, spider mites, because spider mites have both the stippling and the webbing. See, you guys got that one right. Number 7, IPM encourages the use of broad spectrum pesticides. Oh, you guys, it was 100%. It's false. Number 8, which is not considered an IPM tool? Yep, and you guys, most of you guys got that one right. It's planting susceptible varieties. You do not want to plant those susceptible varieties unless you want to use a lot of pesticides or swim against the current to try to keep the plants alive. So number 9, a pesticide is labeled for use on ornamental plants for aphid control. You can also use this product to control aphids on your lettuce plants. Yep, 100%. See, you guys got that right. Why am I even here? So this type of distortion was more likely caused by, again, the Eriophid mites. Good job, guys. So I will change that answer to number 1, and I'll send Alexa the updated version of this, and she can go ahead and send it to you guys if you guys would like. Other than that, I mean, we're pretty much done. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, someone said explain number 2. I'm sorry, Linda, I was not paying attention. Okay, so in my talk at the beginning, I said that a single pest doesn't necessarily cause a single symptom. Meaning, if you have something like a caterpillar or a beetle that's like munching on a specific part of your plant, say the fruit, it's opening up your plant to, it's basically giving your plant a wound. And so once your plant is wounded that way, then that allows other things like pathogens to get in there. And so you'll have pathogens then attacking the plant. And so just because you had that one arthropod, it's not going to just do the munching, like the biting damage, but it can also open up the plant to other different types of symptoms that other people may see. Or like the sooty mold is another one, where secreting the honeydew, you know, sure, you've got the aphids or your scale there, and they're sucking your plant dry, but then they're secreting the honeydew, which is now bringing ants along. Ants can also start consuming plant parts, and then that honeydew can also start causing sooty mold to get onto your plant, which can, you know, damage the fruit or damage the plant. Does that explain everything, Linda, or do you need more? Aw, thank you, Bonnie. You rock as well. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Let me see where, oh my gosh, okay.
So
Number
keep coming with your
2.
questions and comments, but then please stay on for another
Okay.
minute for Anna. And then when Anna's done, some more program updates for you. As I said at the beginning, it's changing by the hour. So stay
Okay.
tuned.
And someone was asking, what is the best way to treat areophid mites? So again, it's going to be the timing. You can use specific pesticides like sulfurs to get rid of them, but it's also going to have to do with sanitation. So usually, if you know you have them in there, you want to cut those pieces of the plant off. You know, so for, say, the caneberries, usually you mow down the caneberries. You don't want to keep those canes on the floor just kind of drying off, because once they start drying off, then those mites basically move off, and then they'll just reinfest the next year because they'll stay in the leaf litter. So you want to kind of like try to get those to a compost bin or to your yard waste as soon as possible, so that if they're in your yard waste and they dry off, there's nowhere for them to go, and then they'll end up just like starving in there. You know, and again, or you can use something like sulfur dust. So, oh, and then Linda said, but doesn't that mean that they can? Well, okay, so when I wrote this question, a single pest can cause a single symptom. It's very rare that they just cause one symptom. Usually it's that people will bring in a plant because they'll cause multiple symptoms, if that makes sense. Like when your plant starts showing some of these symptoms, people will see a lot of other things going on with your plant because of the weakening of it. So for the next quiz, I'll try to reword this question. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. Okay. Yes, so Linda, thank you. So likely cause. I will definitely do that. Thank you. Let me see, I'm trying to read through the questions. Oh, email again. Okay, I will give you my email again. Here you go. I'll just put it here in the chat, and I will give Alexa a copy of the PowerPoint and also the quiz with the answers, and I will change it to likely, and I'll have her hand it out. So does that sound good to everyone?
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
great. Thank you, Anna.
Okay, so I'll get back on. Yes, so thank you guys all again for kind of hanging in there and being troopers through all of this. I know it's really hard to do these types of presentations via Zoom because it's really hard to be animated and get everyone to participate, but you guys were awesome at it, and I'm glad everything worked out. So if there's no other questions, or if you guys have any other questions, you know, again, feel free to reach out to me. So thank you guys very much, and I'll let you get back on to Alexa, and yeah, so.
Thank
Why
you
is my
so
name
much,
okay?
Anna.
I can't answer that question. That's technical. So,
Oh.
okay, I'm going to sign off now.
Thank you
I'm like,
so
I
much.
don't know.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
All right, take care.
Okay. You too. Let me figure out how to sign off here.
There should be a leave
Okay.
meeting button somewhere. And
I
so for
know,
the trainees, yeah, it's different on every screen. So for the trainees that are still on the line,
here it is.
I have some updates from the education committee, or maybe you were in the restroom during the break. So I just want to share these real quickly, and I'll send these out in an email too. But they noted, of course, today's class will be offered via Zoom, as will next week's class with Oleg. We are considering omitting Jim's last lecture called Snake Oil, because it's more of just a fun activity, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not needed for the final. So definitely count on tuning in next week for Oleg, and then we'll follow up more regarding the class with Jim on the 8th. The final exam, they are proposing that we put the final exam in a survey. So many of you already have experience filling in the online survey tools. So it would be a question where you can do short answer or multiple choice. It would get emailed to you. You fill it out electronically. And they said that they will email it via survey on April 1st. And the deadline to return the final, so to complete it online, will be April 8th. What I need to find out as I read this is I'm not sure if you can work on it and save your progress and go back to it. So I'm going to have to do some research and figure out if that's a possibility. But look for an email with that final in it on April 1st. For the helpline, for those of you that have not yet completed your one-on-one helpline training, we are going to give you ample time to complete that because we do not yet know when normal helpline operations will continue. So for those that have not done the one-on-one, that will not prohibit you from completing the class and becoming a Master Gardener. But we will stay on top of you. And I know Rowena means it when she says this. She will stay on top of you to make sure you do get it done eventually. For your projects, as I mentioned during the break, we are going to be very lenient when it comes to that 20-hour commitment. Rather, it's going to be more important that you complete your project, that you stick with the site and you stick with the project until it's completed. We are going to lean quite a bit on the hands-on leads and ask them and ask them how it went and have them verify that everybody made a good faith effort to contribute to the project. And they're also saying that for the report for the hands-on project, they're proposing that as part of the final exam, they include a couple questions. For example, give a brief overall description of your project. What did you gain from the project? And describe what you feel passionate about and that you might like to share with others in the future. So for that project, it sounds like that might be tied in as an element of the final exam via survey tool through just a couple of short answer questions. Last thing here is graduation. Again, unfortunately, we've had to postpone the event that was scheduled in May. So stay tuned as far as when that will be rescheduled, and we'll keep you posted on that. Obviously, the job fair has also now been postponed. So stay tuned. Okay, I think that was the updates I received from them. Any questions for me or Bonnie or Rowena? Why you guys are all together?
Alexa, can you hear me?
Yes.
Betty.
Hi, Betty.
Thank you very much for putting this together. Going to school in bed first is excellent.
Thank you. I'm glad it worked out well. I know connectivity is iffy. And like Anna said, it's very hard to present in this format. She does a wonderful job of it. So thank you for those of you that signed on. I think we've pretty much had everybody here. So thank you. I see Linda's question. Will we hear about Zoom executive committee meetings? Yes. So as I mentioned, the next executive committee meeting, and very likely the one in May after that, will be administered or held via Zoom. When that meeting link gets created, it will be sent out to all Master Gardeners. So you will definitely hear about executive committee meetings. Yes, next week's class will still be at 1 p.m. So it'll be Oleg's weed class. And again, next Wednesday, April 1st at 1 p.m. And I will share the link to the meeting. Again, I will probably schedule it at 12:30 for those that want to log in early and just test your connection. But class will start at 1 p.m. And yes, I think it'll be possible to share a hard copy of the final. No problem. We'll set it up in survey, but we can also share the questions. And maybe that's a good way to do it too, is if we share a hard copy, you can, have a growing document, you can fill it in on a Word document and save as you go, and then just copy and paste into the survey once you've filled out the hard copy. So that's actually a really good idea. Thank you, Lori. Yes, you will need a new URL for each meeting. So each class, each meeting, you will get a separate email with a separate Zoom URL unique to that class. So Otherwise, as we said, I'll follow up after this. Once I get that new answer key from Anna, I will send that all to you. I will also share her presentation and post that onto Collaborative Tools, so you can access it there. And as I said, all the program updates I just went over real quickly, I will also send that material in a email. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. I know that this is not the way you saw class going, and I'm sorry for those of you that became very invested. All of you have become very invested in hands-on projects. So just hoping that we're able to jump right back into them, hopefully before too long. Great. Well, I'll stay on for another couple minutes if there's more questions. Otherwise, we're done for today. So feel free. There's a, you can either just exit out of it or there's a leave meeting button. At least for me, it's in the lower left corner. So feel free to tune out. Look out for more from me, and we'll see you all next week. But like I said, I'll stay on for any more questions for a few minutes here. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
All right. Hopefully, okay. I hope this horrible pandemic.
Hope you're cutting out,
Make us
Cruz. Yes. Yeah, we're all hoping this resolves quickly.
Alexa?
Yes, Wendy?
I'm sorry, what was the answer to number 10, please?
I know it was option C. I'm not sure what the question was. Let me see. Let me see if I can pull it up on my screen here.
Yeah.
So question number 10 was, oh, the picture of the lemon. And it said, what type of distortion more likely caused this? And it was the distorted lemon, and it was C, which is the arophid mites.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You got it.
And I'm sorry, did we have her email address? I didn't see that, Anna's email address.
It was at the beginning of her presentation, but I will also, when we share her presentation, I will send it, but let me see. I can pull it up now also and share it in the chat box. Okay, let's see. Okay, so it's anna.d.howell01@gmail.com.
Great. Thank you very much, Alexa.
You're welcome.
Alexa, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So when I was doing the chat, my name never came up. Of everybody else's name came up from who it was from, but my name never came up.
So it was entered into the dialog box, but just your name didn't come up?
Right. I just did another one and it still isn't doing that.
Yeah, and I haven't seen anything from you pop up. Are you sure you're sending it to everyone? So above where you type your message, it says to, and then does it say everyone?
It said everyone when I was doing it. Let me see if I
Yeah, try again.
Okay, so it says type message here.
Right.
Okay. Do you see it says it's me trying?
I don't even see that. So Linda said that she can see your name when you chat. I think it just says, oh, from me. So from your perspective, it says from me. But I don't see Diane's name popping up if you just sent something.
Yeah, I saw everybody else's name when they chatted, but I didn't ever see mine.
And you're sure it says to everyone? Because I find mine, it continuously defaults to whoever sent the most current message, the last message.
Uh-huh. I see your name.
Oh, Linda said it looks like you just sent them to her.
Oh.
You might have to change.
So how did that happen?
Yeah, so for whatever reason, when someone adds a comment, the default is to respond directly to that individual privately. And so if you look just above where it says type message here, it says to, and
Yeah.
then there's a little drop down menu and you can click the arrow there and you
Oh,
can
yeah.
choose, and at the very top, you should see everyone.
Okay, so everyone. Okay. It was on everyone, but let me see if you get this.
Yeah, unfortunately that changes without you changing it, I've found. And so you have to be, yep, that time it came through.
Okay, but, okay, so I never see my name. I just see everybody else's name. Is that what you're saying? Because
Well, from yours, it should say from me. So you should still see your comment. It just won't say your name. It'll say from me. So right now mine says from Diane Burke to
okay,
everyone.
So you see my name. Okay.
I do.
All
yeah.
right. Okay, I got
Yeah.
it. All right,
Yeah.
great. Okay.
Yeah, you just have to keep your eye on that everyone, the to bar, because it'll change
Yeah,
for
make
whatever
sure it's
reason.
to everyone. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take good care. Yeah,
Thank you. You too.
bye.
Bye.
Alexa, I just wanted to ask though, on the projects we're doing, because we work outside, and I know like the farmers markets allowing them to continue, why they wouldn't consider?
Yeah, great question. That's just the UC's policy. It is gatherings of any size, regardless of location or venue. And so that's just the UC's restriction, unfortunately. And were you working, you were at the farm, right?
We're at the Herrick.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Herrick's been closed entirely now. And so
Yeah.
there is no access. So what we were doing at Herrick was we were allowing volunteers as like a critical as needed basis this past week. So like Harry was still going to fertilize and tend to the plant sale plants. Water Brigade was still operating. And as of, well, technically, officially as of tomorrow, all volunteer access has to stop, even all staff. I'm not even allowed to go back into our office right now.
Yeah.
And so that's just the UC's policy. They tend to be a little bit more strict than the local or statewide policies, just as precaution. So
Will they follow if the state makes a decision on when they're ending it? Will they follow that, or?
They'll follow state and local. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if the, state and local, it's important that it's both. If they open up the restrictions, then the UC will too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you, Dana. I appreciate it.
Extraordinary conditions.
It's bizarre, certainly.
It is.
Well, I appreciate you all being so adaptable and flexible. So thank you.
Okay.
All
Well,
right, hang in there.
enjoy the time off, which is not really, but a bit of a rest.
Yeah, it's a little different.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you, Dana. Bye.